Here we have two of the best-selling Superminis from the early 90s, because in today's twin-cam twin test, it's the Ford Fiesta versus the Rover Metro. We're going to look at how these cars stack up against each other in terms of engineering, efficiency and performance, and then we're going to directly compare the designs of these cars against each other. At the time, this was the biggest battle for supremacy. Ford's new Fiesta, launched in February 1989, or Rover's re-engineered Metro, launched in May 1990. For fairness, these two cars are base models. The Ford is a 1990 Fiesta 1 litre bonus, which was a special edition based on the Popular, and for your extra money you got some wheel trims and not very much else. The Rover, on the other hand, is absolute base model. It's a 1991 Metro 1.1C with two optional extras, a sunroof and a radio, although it isn't the original radio, obviously. In May 1990, a Fiesta Popular would have set you back £5,935, with a Metro 1.1C 50 quid more, so at this point they're pretty close in terms of pricing. For context, these two were near the top of the class and battled for position throughout the 1980s, even if the Fiesta was the best-selling every year from 1984. The Mk3 Fiesta was an all-new car when it was launched in 1989 and immediately sold very, very well, dominating the small car market until it was replaced in 1995, even if the critical reception was lukewarm. 30 years on from the Mk3's launch, the Fiesta is still at the top of the sales charts, with the frankly wonderful Mk7 Fiesta securing Ford's reputation for building great small cars. The Metro is a completely different kettle of fish. Rover had no money, as per usual, but their little Austin Metro, launched in 1980, was still performing okay, so they re-engineered the car to bring it up to 1990 standards with new styling, new trim, modified suspension, but most importantly, all new engines. This rebadged Metro received gushing reviews, but it didn't stem the falling sales figures that continued into the reign of the Mark IV Fiesta, and it was finally killed off in late 1997. But why did it last so long? Well, there wasn't really a replacement on offer. Rover were planning to milk the Metro until the launch of the new Mini, penciled in for the year 2000, but declining sales, poor NCAP results and BMW's sale of Rover dashed those hopes. The Metro never really got a like-for-like replacement. The Rover 200 was a bit too big, and the City Rover was in the segment below. The MG3, launched in 2011, and the current Mini, introduced in 2013, are the closest you'll find to the Metro's bloodline. Both cars won What Car's Car of the Year, the Fiesta in 1989 and the Metro in 1991. Let's dive in, and we'll start with the engines. Both cars have carburetor-fed 4-cylinder units, but that's where the similarities end, because these are two very different engines. The Fiesta is quite old-fashioned in this department, although Ford kept updating it. This is a variation of the Ford Kent engine introduced in 1959, here at 999cc. For the Mk3 Fiesta, Ford fitted a brand new cylinder head that improved fuel economy and emissions. There's also no distributor. Ford fitted electronic ignition control. We all know how famous and long-lived the Kent engine was, so it's not too much of a surprise to find it still being used here. That is, until you compare it to the Metro. This little Rover was bang up to date with its 1120cc K-Series engine. It's got an overhead camshaft and it's incredibly light. So much so that Caterham and Lotus later used this engine in their sports cars for its high power output per kilogram. In an early Metro like this one, they're great little engines, but the later you go, the more likely you are to run into issues. A number of design and production tweaks made the K-Series worse, and after winning awards in its early years, it ended up with a bad reputation for popping head gaskets. Also, it has a timing belt, whereas the Kent engine has a chain. But that extra service requirement is outweighed by a 12,000 mile service interval for the Metro, but only 6,000 for the Fiesta. The K-Series in the Metro makes 60 brake horsepower, whereas the Kent engine has to make do with 44. There's a big gulf in terms of performance when it comes to these cars. Fiesta will lollop up to 60 in 18.1 seconds, while Metro will do it in 13.7. the same time as a brand new Toyota Aygo. That isn't to say that either the Metro is a rocket or the Fiesta's a slug, but it's got to be one of the two. The Fiesta redeems itself though with its impressive fuel economy. In an autocar group test, the Metro achieved just under 46 mpg, while the Fiesta did 50. Bear in mind this is an engine that started life in the 1950s. That's a pretty impressive figure. But that's kind of where it ends for the Fiesta. In the same group test, Autocar described the Kent engine as a sewing machine with worn bearings. It was really showing its age. The K-Series engine remains an exceptionally smooth little engine. It's quiet, unobtrusive, and it makes a sweet little wail. There's no denying that the K-Series is a much more refined engine. Both of these engines are strapped to 4-speed gearboxes in these base model cars. They both have fine changes that you wouldn't really notice if they weren't side by side, but the Metro change is just a little bit more accurate than the Ford's. Of course, you couldn't get that power to the road if it wasn't for suspension, and again, these two cars have very different approaches. The Fiesta is very conventional both for its day and by modern standards, with McPherson struts up front and a torsion beam at the back, so it rides bumps much better than the Mark II Fiesta it replaced. The Metro uses Dr. Moulton's hydrogas system, which consists of displacers at each corner containing nitrogen for springing and hydraulic fluid for damping. It's linked front to rear, so the back's meant to anticipate, but what this really means is independent rear suspension. The result is that Autocar declared the Metro to be the best, even if it still didn't match the Peugeot 205. But then again, what did? Although they said the Metro's steering wouldn't be out of place in a fast hatch, it became slightly muffled at the centre, which I can agree with. They say the Metro soaks up small and large bumps with ease, while the Fiesta's steering can start to squirm over large bumps, and my experience with Mark III Fiestas tells me that they're right. They tend to be a little bit more roly-poly than Metros as well. On the other hand, they were scathing about the Fiesta, saying it lacked composure, with the steering heavy, low-geared and lifeless, and Honest John calling it stodgy and uncultured. I'm not going to give my own verdict on this because I haven't driven a Fiesta for long enough, but I'll wholeheartedly agree with Autocar's description of the Metro. Additionally, Car Magazine said that the Metro was the only Supermini that was genuinely fun to drive. My view is that it's accurate and refuses to understeer, remaining neutral right up to the limit, when it can start to get a little bit vague, but it will never push into proper understeer. Either way, the pundits are adamant that the Metro is a convincing winner in terms of engineering, but the public disagreed. In 1990, Ford sold 150,000 Fiestas, while Rover only flogged 80,000 Metros. Quite the difference. So why was the public so enamoured by the Fiesta? Was it style, equipment, practicality? Let's have a look. If we start at the exterior, the Metro is quite clearly base model with its black hubcaps, which may look cool today, but they were a bit old hat in 1990. Additionally, the rear bumper, which has this metal section in the centre, something only the 1.1C had. All other Metros had full plastic bumpers. Although charming in a classic kind of way, it spoils the quality look of the car. Rover did a really good job with the restyle, and I think it's a really attractive car, especially the boot lid. The Fiesta, on the other hand, could masquerade as a mid-range model. It's got full wheel trims and has the same body features as any other Fiesta. Both share the same wedge front late 80s, early 90s style, but somehow the Metro looks a bit cleaner. I think the Metro is better looking in this era, which is roles reversed from the Mark II Fiesta, which I think was better looking than the Austin Metro. But this is all personal preference. A good friend of mine thinks exactly the opposite, so decide for yourselves. We'll start with practicality, and the Fiesta quite clearly wins here. It's got a bigger boot than the Metro because it's a bigger car, even though it does have intrusion from its suspension. The Metro's hydrogas is all tucked away underneath the car. Now, I'm sat in the back of the Fiesta here, and despite the fact there isn't loads of room, the seat is scalloped in a little bit, and I'm perfectly comfortable sat back here. You can't say the same for the Metro. And here is the Metro's Achilles heel, because I'm now sat in the back, and you sit really high up. I mean, I'm 5'9", 5'10", and no headroom there, and there is no legroom whatsoever. I have to get my knees around the side of the seat to be here, and I'm not very comfortable at all. The back of this seat here is very, very low. Of course, no headrests as in either car, but this is really unacceptable for a Supermini of the early 90s, and it really shows the age of this body shell, which dates back to the late 70s in terms of design. A place where the Metro redeems itself though are the seats, because these seats are lovely and comfortable. They're derived from the ones in the Rover 200, and they're lovely big armchairs that have lots of shoulder support and also have these bolsters which don't hold you in, but when you go into a corner and you start to slide about, they keep you in your seat really nicely. The seats in the Metro are so much nicer than the ones in the Fiesta, but there are these rubber hard headrests, which in the Fiesta you get proper padded ones. Just brings down the tone of it again. It seems to be a recurring theme that the Metro is either so much better than the Fiesta in certain aspects or so much worse in others. There doesn't seem to be a bit where they're both as good as each other. They both seem to either dominate in one aspect and then lose out in the other. The seats in the Fiesta don't offer any support, although I do quite like this pattern. It is very 90s, and you get proper padded headrests, unlike in the Metro where you just get the rubber ones. But there's just no support to these seats, and there isn't much support for your shoulders either, so I can imagine you get a little bit uncomfortable after a while. In the driver's seat you can tell that the Metro is a bit last year. I like the dashboard and I think it's more logical than the Fiestas, but it's a bit more old-fashioned. The driving position is the same. The steering wheel is way over to the passenger's side and the pedals are tiny, as well as there being no footrest. Instrumentation is basic and accurate in both, but the Metro's is a bit clearer. The Fiesta stalks feel more solid and twist for lights, while the Metro has these thumb wheels. Both cars have the horn on the end of the indicator stalk, which is the best place to have it when you think about it. The heater controls are obscured by the steering wheel on the Metro and are in a more conventional place in the Fiesta. Ventilation is good in the Metro, with these vents along the fascia offering fresh air only that comes in through the bonnet scoops. Door cards in the Fiesta are a step up from the ones in the Metro. They're nicely trimmed and feel much more modern than the vinyl in the Metro. So while the Metro feels better put together than the Fiesta does, the Fiesta wins back in terms of modernity and design, even though the Rover eventually wins on comfort. Overall, these little cars champion in very different specialities. The Metro in driving characteristics and the Fiesta in practicality. It's easy to see why the public chose the Fiesta thanks to Ford's marketing, special editions, and the real fact that people don't really give a toss whether a car's got sharper steering. If it's got a bigger boot and it looks more modern, they will go for it every time. At the end of the day, it's all a bit academic because these two cars are 30 years old. But which one would I have? Well, from the driver's seat, I think I'd rather have the Metro. It's just a nicer car to drive. It's got that great free revving little K-Series engine and it hangs on for dear life in the corners. But in terms of practicality, in terms of actually having to move things about and do car things, the Fiesta might be a better bet. If you subscribe to my channel, you won't be surprised to hear that, as this is my Metro. It's my daily driver, and I wouldn't swap it for the Fiesta. But if somebody offered me one, I'd jump at it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll have more coming along next week.